This is Trinity Sunday, according to the church calendar. And it's a Sunday, therefore, that we think in a special way about the Spirit that we just celebrated the coming of last week on Pentecost. We think about the Spirit's entry to the scene in a special way with Jesus' departure from his worldly ministry after the resurrection. So we think about the three elements of God, and the ancient church had this great word for that called perichoresis. And that second part begins the word that we associate with chorus and choreography. And so what's an interesting thing to think about is that the Spirit is in harmony with the rest of the members of the chorus, that is the Father and the Son, and that there is a sort of choreography going on within the very Godhead itself, that somehow the members of the Trinity dance together. There's this divine dance going on in the inner world of God. And so in this week after Pentecost, where the Spirit gave birth to the church, we're going to reflect a little bit on the significance and the power of that. The texts really lead us in a handful of directions. The first thing that strikes me is that the Spirit is associated with wisdom and truth. It's one of the most lovely chapters of the Bible, Proverbs 8, that talks about that fact. That somehow the Spirit is this presence, this creative and supportive presence, the wisdom of God. The word Sophia is the Greek word for that, and this power for reasoning about truths and about tracing their relationships together. The Spirit is that force behind our ability to do that. That we can take these various different elements of knowledge that are present in reality and somehow bring them together. And the better we're at that, the more open we are to seeing the relationships, the wiser we are. The word wisdom makes sense there. It's interesting that the Spirit and the Christ came into being, the scriptures tell us, at about the same time. You'll remember the beginning of John's Gospel, where it reads, "He was," that is, the Christ, the Word, "was in the beginning with God, and all things came into being through him." So he was there before creation. And in the passage Robin just read, the Spirit of wisdom was there before the beginning of the earth. They're delighting in the creative process and delighting in us as humanity. What's fascinating too is what the scriptures teach us about what the standard is that wisdom, the Spirit, the Christ, God Almighty calls us to. Remember those verses from Proverbs. "Hear, for I will speak noble things, and from my lips will come what is right. My mouth will utter truth. Wickedness is an abomination to my lips." So truth, what is right, what ennobles, what recognizes the value and the best of things, is what the Spirit's about. And it's similar in John's Gospel when John talks about the Spirit. It's the Spirit of truth. And what's also interesting is John gives us the name of that Spirit as advocate, what is oftentimes translated as paraclete. And it's a great literal word because it has the two sides of comforting us as well as exhorting us. And we've talked about this before, but I'll repeat it. It makes sense because literally that word paraclete has to do with calling someone beside you for a heart-to-heart. And the situations in which you need to have that conversation is when that other person may be grieving, and they need your comfort, and they need the intimacy of someone who cares to be really made concrete for them. On the other hand, there are times in which we need to have a hard conversation with someone. The least loving way you could do that is to splat it in public in front of a whole bunch of other people. The loving way to have that conversation in a way that hopefully could be heard is privately, perhaps on the pew, perhaps a park bench, where you can have a face-to-face and literally heart-to-heart. Sometimes the Spirit has to have both of those relationships to us. We know times of grieving and loss. We also know times in which we just want to sail off on our own way, and we need the headwind of the Spirit to push us back and say, "Hey, wrong direction. You need to move someplace in your life." So it's an amazing thing to think of this reality, this presence with us that is always seeking to pull us along the path that is truthful. And when we're open to seeking truth, we know it. We know it. And so I think it's fascinating for us to think about what that means in daily life. It's really, really troubling to see truth constantly being assailed in the public arena, as if we can't find what it is, and then also that we're not required to follow it. That's something that as believers that I think we need to constantly push back against. It may be difficult to find. The truth's not easy to pursue sometimes, but we are committed to it as faithful followers of Christ, as ones who seek to be inspired by the Spirit. We have to push back on efforts to say that that doesn't matter, simply for reasons of maintaining power. And we see so many examples of life. We experience, we commit so many examples of lack of wisdom in our humanity when we're not mindful of the Spirit and its path. I mean, think of the ways in which adults can really behave badly. Sometimes the traumatic foolishness of violence that comes up in these bizarre locations. Think of these adults that will sometimes make a competition between pre-adolescents, elementary age students or children, students comes to my mind so often, but children who are being formed by them, who are being taught by their example. You remember I think it's the teaching of Schweitzer, who said 3 ways to teach people. Teach children. Number 1, you teach by example. Number 2, teach by example. Number 3, teach by example. So in these terrible ways of behaving that sometimes adults break out in these contexts of competitive sports as youngsters are there, and men are punching each other out, it's like, where has your mind gone? Wisdom has flown the coop. And that terrible tragedy this week of 2 fathers on this week of Father's Day, and road rage, choosing violence, and both dying as their children are in the cars. What is this stupidity about? Where have we gone when we stray that far from wisdom? Thankfully, we have other examples out there. I think of the librarian, Anita Kelly, librarian in San Pedro section of LA, who uses a bike as her library in the summer. It's a part of her mission to get kids to read. It's a custom-made bike. It's a conversation starter there for her, right? But she has 250 pounds of books every time she's riding. She says, I believe in the magic of libraries and what they can bring to people. Over the past couple of years, she's given away, not only simply lending, but given away 5,000 books to readers of all ages. That's wisdom. That's a strategy that's meant to be creative. I think of Lee Bishop. Just saw this news, I think it was on Facebook this week. She told this one student it was a pre-K class, this little girl, that she loved her hair. And even told her, don't be mad at me if I come tomorrow to school and I have your hairstyle. Just like you. She said the pre-K student just sort of rolled her eyes and just shrugged it off and went on her way. When she pulled up that little girl the next day and saw Mrs. Bishop in her exact same hairstyle, well, not only did her jaws drop, but her dad's jaws dropped. Bishop explained it this way. She said, any chance I get to make a student feel whole and important, I take it. Plus, I really did love her hair. Now, that's wisdom. Wisdom over time. Wisdom that's committed to not being superhuman, but in all of our humanity, realizing when we've strayed from the path or when we've been wrong, we're not wrong sometime or another, and willing to get back on the track to see the path that we need to. My dad was so great at that. A picture I have of him is either in the workshop, like I actually have a picture of him in our home in Pennsylvania working on some project. He had his safety glasses on. I think I had mine on, and we were looking at something with some precision. I don't know what we were working on. It didn't matter. In those cases, we may have been focused on the task, but that wasn't always the center of our conversation. I remember years before that as a kid, I was his assistant whenever he was repairing cars, in those days in which you could actually repair your own car. And we'd be sitting, my dad would be underneath there, and I'd be next to him on the floor of the garage and ready to hand him the next tool sort of thing. It was, again, this sort of intimacy of task in which an opportunity for connection and sharing what he knew, exemplifying sometimes his ignorance, exemplifying sometimes a path that was the perfect path to take, and sometimes the not so perfect path. But I learned about life and humanity in that process. That's the way wisdom can be transferred, and so often is. This week, Robin and I met a young woman, a talented musician from Minnesota who lives in Finland, but is in country to celebrate with our other friends who were joining us. We got together with lunch with the other friends, and Dana was a gift, an addition. She exudes love for people. You just can tell that. I mean, I'm not someone who's an initial hugger to a stranger, let me tell you. But man, she just invited that. Welcomed me to the table. We were at Bulldogs, and it was like, oh, this is sort of amazing. And that was just the beginning. This is an amazing human being. 18 months ago, she was diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer. 400 people in the world. She described the depth of support that she has had from friends and family all over the world. Remember, she's studying in Finland. She's got connections all over the world. What was incredible, though, was maybe 5 minutes out of the 90 minutes we were together did we talk about the cancer. It didn't overwhelm her life. She exuded that same sort of spirit as the late Gabrielle Grunwald. You may have heard her story this week. Grunwald once said in the midst of her 10-year-long struggle with metastatic cancer, being brave for me means not giving up on the things that make me feel alive. And like her, Dana has the courageous wisdom to choose life. Wise choices. Just heard this year about the winner of the 2019 Global Champion Award related to the use of food, innovative food. And it's the Akshaya Patra organization that's based in Calcutta. You might know this is an amazing statistic, set of statistics to me, that 1/5 of the children in the world live in India. 1/5 of the children in the world live in India. 1/3 of them are so malnutrition, experiencing so much malnutrition, so malnourished, there's the word, that their body's growth is below the range of normal development, simply not having the nourishment that they need. One of India's foremost spiritual masters was really the inspiration for the movement in response to that. You see, Akshaya Patra is the world's largest school meals project. And he was sitting in his room, he had built this sort of center, a spiritual director sort of type, and in that place there did a big feast in the temple area which he had built, and after the feast was served and he was resting, he heard some cries outside, cries of children, and he opened the window and he looked out there, out in the alleyways area around the compound. Here are these children competing with stray dogs for food. And he said, you know, where the Spirit is present, we should be intolerable of that. No children, no child should go hungry. And so what happened? This organization was created that gave hot midday meals to children each day of their school periods. 19 years ago it actually started, with 1,500 children being fed. Now there is a budget of $60 million in U.S. terms. Half of that comes from the government, half comes from businesses and individuals. They provide now midday meals for 1.7 million children, distributed to 15,000 schools. 40 kitchens in 12 of the states of India. Some of them preparing tens of thousands of meals a day are doing their work. When does compassion move us to think, to use our wisdom to make the right path, to take it, to act? And I finally think of the story of Ali Stroker. Who knows the name Ali Stroker? If you watch the Tonys, you know the name Ali Stroker. She made Broadway history, when she was named the first best featured actress in a musical who was in a wheelchair. She was 2 years old when her car was in an accident. Where it was driving driving to avoid a pile of leaves in the road, and it collided head-on with another vehicle. Her brother suffered traumatic brain injury. She suffered the injury of her spinal cord and became paralyzed from her chest down. That was chapter 1 of the story. Chapter 2 is when she was 7, and a 12-year-old neighbor girl, her name was Rachel Antonoff. She returned from a theater camp she had been attending to declare that she was going to direct a backyard production of Annie with Miss Stroker as the star. And at that point, everything changed in her life. She said, when I got on stage, it was the first time that I felt powerful. I was used to people staring at me, but they were staring at me because I was in a wheelchair. And when I was on stage, they were staring at me because I was the star. She's been in acting ever since. In fact, one of my colleagues at Marshall has a son who happens to be deaf. His name is Daniel Durant, who is also an actor, and they know her very well. On Sunday, she arrived at the Tonys in this bright yellow gown, and who was it created by? That same Miss Antonoff, who had called her to the stage the first time when she was 7 years old. She's now a fashion designer. What would it mean for us to provoke the stares of people overwhelmed by our delight in the wisdom and truth and love that can guide our lives? That's a mission that I think we can delight in. And let's renew that commitment in the week to come. Well, join me in prayer, would you please? Spirit, in the midst of the ups and downs of life, in the midst of the greatest joys and the deepest sorrows and the most tragic events, we believe you want us to step forward. We believe that you want us to be the source of wisdom that seeks truth, and that truth is rooted in your essence, and that is love. So may it be this week, we ask it, Lord. In Christ's name, amen.